Today we start a new series that I'll be preaching for the next 2 months from this Sabbath all the way to the end of June, unless we're back in person by then. Now we have this story in front of us, the story of Joseph, that is an amazing story. In fact, it's become quite famous outside of just Christian circles and Jewish circles because of Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and that's a famous musical if you want to look that up. And there's also Joseph, King of Dreams, that came out through DreamWorks, which was a smart move on their part, I think, to choose that story and that title. And it's an amazing story in and of itself from the Bible, and we want to look at it from what is recorded there. Why do we want to look at it? I think it's got incredible points for you and for me, for our families, and for the time that we're living in right now. But first, before we get into it, let's pray. God, thank you for the promise that you've given us through your Son Jesus and in his resurrection. May we see it in Joseph's story, and may we, through our investigation, our exploration, our wandering alongside, may we see ourselves. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So the story of Joseph actually goes far, far back before Joseph was even born. And, think about your family. Have you, the family that you were born into or the family you were raised in, did you ever think that maybe you felt like the situation you're born in was not ideal? Or maybe you see the all too common incredible mistakes or mess-ups or complications that have existed in a family story for generations, and you think, I'm doomed even before I took my first breath. Well, Joseph's story isn't much different. It begins all the way back to actually the first book in the Bible. And it's interesting to look at how Genesis was actually laid out, because the first book, Genesis is the first book of the Bible. The first 11 chapters covered 2,000 years of Earth's history, of life, of human life on this planet. And it goes from Adam and Eve to Cain and Abel, and it just continues on down all the way, just in 11 chapters, all the way through Noah. And then suddenly you have the Tower of Babel in chapter 11. And then in chapter 12, you have this story about this man named Abram, or later Abraham, and his wife Sarah, and how God reached out to them and called them and said to Abraham, I'm going to make from you a nation, a huge nation that is going to affect the whole world. And you're going to have so many descendants that you won't even be able to count them. And so God, he works with this man, Abraham, and his wife Sarah. But they really get things messed up. And I think that this is where we might see our own story or somebody else's story that reflects back on, I don't know. It's a wild story. So Abram, he realizes that he and Sarah are kind of old, and they think, well, we're not going to have a kid. And Sarah, she thinks, well, I have this maidservant, and so I'm going to give. So she saw her maidservant, gave her to her husband, and said, she'll have a kid for me, in my name. So it'll still fulfill God's promise, but it'll be my kid. And so Hagar, she has Ishmael, and shortly after, sometime later, Sarah gets a child, becomes pregnant, and has a son, and names him Isaac, laughter. And so that's what Isaac means. And so she then, having her own child, is now thinking, what's this woman doing in my life? And Hagar had been chiding Sarah. Sarah, she went up to Abraham and said, you get that woman out of my house, and there's all kinds of trouble. So he, for the sake of one baby mama, he got rid of the other baby mama. It got crazy. And, it's wrong, but it got crazy. And this story, this man of God, then the story continues on through Isaac. And Isaac, he finds this, is found for him, this beautiful woman, Rebecca. And Rebecca is with, she has 2 children, Jacob and Esau. Now Esau was actually the oldest, but they were twins, so by a few minutes. And so Jacob and Esau, there was this rivalry that was even before they were born. She was like, what's going on? And she was told, you're having twins, that's what's going on. And so she has these twins, and Esau was super hairy, and Jacob was super smooth-skinned, and Esau loved, as he grew up, loved to go hunting, and he became his dad's favorite, and Jacob loved to cook and be in the tents with the women, and so he became his mom's favorite. And they played these favorites against each other, and there was this prophecy over them, and then they started to try and make it happen. Jacob eventually, he finagled his brother out of his older brother by a few minutes. He finagled his brother out of his inheritance, of the birthright, the promise that the Messiah would be born through him. And Esau, he didn't care about spiritual things, so he's like, whatever, I got lentils. And so he went off. And then Jacob was told by his mom to go then lie to his father and pretend like he was Esau. And the father that neglected him, the father that thought he was second best, the father that had all of his hopes set on his brother. And so he goes to his father and lies and says that he's his brother. And then his brother, when he finds out, he says, well, I'm going to kill him. And Jacob then has to flee to another land. And it's crazy. I mean, what is this? You can't make this stuff up. And so Jacob, we're in this place where Jacob is on the run for his life after being so trifling with his family, because his family's trifling, and all the way back, and there he is by himself in the wilderness. And I actually chose to preach on the stairs because, one, I haven't preached on stairs before, and two, Jacob, he laid down that night and he had a dream. In the terror of that darkness and of that isolation, he had a dream that he saw a ladder that extended from where he was at all the way up into heaven. And he saw the angels of God going up and down on it. And so when he woke up, he goes, wow, I didn't know God was in this place. God was in this place, and I didn't know it. In this crazy, empty, dark time in this space and in my life, God was here. And so he promises God. And it's interesting that this is he's heard prophecies, he heard stories, he knows all the stories, but this is his first connection to this living God, the God of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and he's Jacob. So he's thinking, wow, okay, God, I'm going to make a deal with you. He says, okay, I'm going to make a deal with you, God. If I come back here, if you bring me back here safe to my homeland, where I belong, then I will serve you. I don't know what God's reaction was immediately to that, but Jacob, he gets up, he packs up his stuff, and he heads on out towards where he's going to his mother's brother's, so his uncle's place. And so he goes there and he meets his, I guess it's his cousin, and Rachel, and she's beautiful. She's stunning. She's beautiful in form and beauty, I think is what they said. And she's stunning. And he falls for her right away. And so he tells her father, like, hey, I will, can I marry your daughter? And he goes, yeah, if you work for me. And so he says, I'll work 7 years. So he worked 7 years to marry Rachel, and it seemed like just a few moments to him because he was so Twitter-pated. And but then Laban, his father-in-law, he switches the sisters, because Rachel had an older sister named Leah, and Leah, she wasn't stunning like her sister, but she had really soft eyes. That was the neatest feature about her. When you looked in her eyes, she was stunning. Her eyes were really breathtaking. Soft eyes, delicate eyes. Now, Jacob didn't love Leah. He loved Rachel. And so he's like, all right, whatever. Well, I'm going to work another 7 years then, and I'm going to get Rachel. And so he did that, and so he married both sisters. And what's interesting is that we have here in chapter 29 of Genesis. Oh, I forgot. So Genesis, it's going through the first 11 chapters are telling about the story of the creation, and it goes down to the quick spiral of people on earth, and then it goes into the flood, and then the Tower of Babel, and then into Abraham's story. And the rest of the story, it continues. When when it gets to the story of Jacob, and it continues, we have this, it takes up the middle portion of Genesis. And Jacob, he's building his family with Leah. She has a son. She names the firstborn, so she names him Reuben, which in Hebrew actually means son. Very creative. But I think it was kind of a statement. I think Leah, who knew that she was second favorite, not favorite at all. She's the second one to her sister, her younger sister. She knows that she's second, and she, growing up, everyone gave her sister attention, but she was always behind her sister. She was always the second one. She had to be, her husband had to be tricked in order to marry her. So she has all this baggage with her, and she has a son, and so she names him Son. I'm reading into it. Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. But she names him Son. I had a son. Yeah, thought you like that, Rachel. And so she has a son, and then she keeps having sons. I mean, she just keeps having sons, and it makes this commentary that God saw that she wasn't loved, and so he keeps giving her these sons, this favoritism, so to speak. In that day and age, that was showing that she was favored. And then we have in chapter 30, where Leah, she stops having children. And so Rachel, it says, chapter 30, verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. Oh, Rachel envied Leah. Oh, the tables have turned. And said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God? Who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" So she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her." Does that little action sound familiar? Okay, just kind of these patterns, bad choices being repeated generation after generation. Okay, anyway, so Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged my case, and he has has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Now Dan means judge. So Rachel said, God has judged and has given me a son, Dan. You know, like Daniel is God is my judge. El is God. So judge, God. God is my judge. So Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali, which means my wrestlings. And it's really interesting in the Hebrew, I mean, even beyond the names, which is fascinating. She says, I have wrestled. With great wrestlings I have wrestled. She actually said, great here is actually the word Elohim, with God's wrestlings, with the wrestlings of God, I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. Wow, the sibling rivalry, and it's interesting that when she comes to look at what's here in this text. She turns to Jacob and she goes, you know, give me a son or else I'm going to die. Give me a child, come on. And he's like, what am I, God? And then she goes, with God's wrestlings, I have wrestled. It's fascinating. It's great. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad. Now, a troop comes. It's not kind of an awkward name. Apparently, there's kind of a debate. I was looking up online. There's kind of a debate as to what exactly Gad means. There's multiple meanings anyway. And so, which did she actually mean? A troop comes, or did she mean fortune? And so, one translation said, what fortune? So I think Leah, I prefer the second interpretation, that Leah said, oh, sister, what fortune? I've got another son. You have your sons, I got my sons. More sons. A troop comes, whatever. Then Leah said, and Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher, and Asher means happy. And then to Leah's side, the point, the tally, goes to Dinah, the daughter that's born, which is really special. It's kind of like the cherry on top, the icing on the cake. Then God, verse 22, then God remembered Rachel. Can you see this? Can you see what's happening here? Like, Rachel wants our credit so bad, and which I get, but she's trying to figure it out. So she takes her maid, and then she's trying to win against her sister, and she already has the favoritism, she already has the popular, but it's not enough. And so she's wrestling with her sister. But then in verse 22 it says, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her, and opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. It's not enough, never enough. So then the stories continue, and to skip over them, Jacob, right when Joseph is born, okay, Benjamin's not born yet, we don't know about him yet. Jacob has 11 sons, and it's not until like all 10, we don't even have a response from him as to if he's happy or not. It has to do with what the mothers are feeling at the time, or the wives are feeling at the time. And so for at this point, Jacob, as soon as he has a son, a biological son from Rachel, he's like, all right, that's it. I'm done. We're leaving. I'm no, the next verse, verse 25. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Joseph said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my own country." All of his plans changed. He had this complete change of mind because Rachel had a son. All the other children, can you see how messed up this is? All the other children that were born to him, which I'm sure were incredible young men and young women that were being born to him and adding to his family, they didn't change him. He was just, all right, cool. But now when Joseph is born, now he's like, okay, a change has to be made. Now I can go back home because it's so messed up. So then he says to his father-in-law, I'm gonna go, peace. And Laban goes, no, and makes this whole arrangement deal. Laban totally shysters him. And then Jacob eventually is like, no, we gotta get out of here, and we're gonna have to do it secretly. So he tells his wives, we have to go. And this is the first time, and I think the only time, they ever agree on anything. They both say, yeah, our brothers don't care about us. They're treating us like he sold us to him as wives. And what do we have here? And so they actually leave. They pack up all their stuff, and they pretend everything's fine, and then they just get on. Rachel, she steals even from her father the deeds to the land that he owns, because she feels that they've been cheated out of their inheritance because they're women. And so she grabs them and puts them, and then lies to him, and it just goes crazy. And then Laban pursues Jacob, and they meet up finally after a few days, and Laban's like, why are you taking my daughters that I love so much? That he's cheated, and then he's lied to, that he's maneuvered, and I don't know. And then all your children are actually my children. Yeah, right. He didn't care. And then it continues, and so then Jacob goes, why did you pursue me? Like, these are my wives, these are my children, this is my flock. What's your deal? And so they just really are ready to have it out for each other. And Laban's like, well, some stuff's gone from my house. And Jacob's like, look for it, and he can't find it. And so, and right here in verse, I don't know which verse, Laban and Jacob, they go, may God watch between me and you. And so they sit down, make a covenant, and they say, you don't come across on this side, I won't cross over on that side, and we're good. And God will see. And so they eat to like seal the deal, which I wonder what kind of meal that, terrible indigestion. And then they get up and they leave. Now Jacob, who had wronged his brother Esau, Esau had threatened to kill him, as he's coming back towards his homeland, he's thinking, what am I going to do? And so he sends all of his wealth ahead of him with the servants, and the servants are to tell Esau, everything that comes, everything that you see is yours, Esau. Jacob is sending it as a present, as a gift. And reading it this time around, I've read this story many, many times, but this time around, I wonder if all those years of service, yes, they were for his wives, yes, they were for his own wealth, but maybe in the back of his mind he thought, someday I'll want to go home. Someday. And I know I won't be accepted for who I am. I won't be accepted I'm going to be threatened by my brother. The only thing that will actually earn my brother's peace, not affection, not acceptance, just peace, will be if I give him stuff, and I have to give him a lot of stuff. Maybe that whole time he was thinking, I have to buy it. And so he works hard so he can buy back his brother's peace. I don't know. It doesn't explicitly say it, but I really wonder in this story. So he gets there, and he sends all of his herds and children and wives on over the river Jordan, and he's there on that other side. And this is not about Jacob's story. This is about Joseph, but this all sets up for his story, because Jacob, in this place, again, he's alone now on the other side of the river. He's in darkness, and he's wrestling with himself over what's going on, and then appears this other person that he then thinks is I don't know what he thinks, and he's wrestling with this other. But then as the sun is rising, Jacob is prevailing with this other, and the other touches his hip, and it goes out of socket immediately. I mean, it's a miracle, but to the negative, And he realizes that he's wrestling with a representative of God, and he says, and the other one says, "Let me go." And he goes, "Not unless you bless me. Not unless you bless me." And it's so fascinating because it says, "What is your name?" And he goes, "Jacob." Now, Jacob means heel grabber. He's been grabbing heels his whole life. He's been wrestling his whole life against God. And it's here that then it says, and he wrestled against God and prevailed. What? Is this not crazy? This really thoroughly messed up man with a thoroughly messed up family, making thoroughly messed up decisions, wrestles with God, and God says, "Oh, you've won. You've won because you didn't give up." What? What? So, that next morning, he gets up, and it says the sun rose on Jacob. And Jacob, he goes out and he meets Esau. And Esau, he sees him. And Jacob's like, "Did you see all the presents? Did you get all the..." And Esau's like, "I got enough stuff. Like, I'm so glad to see you." Whew. How many reunions how many stories have not had that moment of reconciliation between people that have for their whole lives been at odds? How many people have had such division in their DNA? Maybe you're thinking about your family. Maybe you're thinking about your brother or your sister or your parents, and how there just is no hope for reconciliation. Maybe you thought, I have to manipulate them in order for them to love me, to accept me. I need to buy their love. I need to earn their forgiveness. And yet, even with those thoughts, those messed up thoughts, you have no chance of it working out. So they go back, and Jacob, he returns to Bethel, that house of God, that place where he saw this ladder, and he's like, surely God was in this place, and he recognizes that God has been with him, that God, in all of his messed upness, God has been with him. And then there, Rachel, verses 16 and on, she's in childbirth with her second son, that son that she claimed, named it and claimed it, that then brought her death. And she's dying in childbirth, and the midwife, she says, "Don't fear, because you have a son." And with her last breath, she names this kid. It's late, I'm sorry. I wanted to record this so bad. She names his son Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. Can you imagine being named that? Or always called that? You're good for nothing, right? You know what I mean? And but then Jacob, he says, Ben-Oni Noah Benjamin, which is I forget what that means. It doesn't mean sorrow. Oh, my right hand, son of my right hand. He's the baby of the family. And so Jacob, he buries Rachel. And so now it's him and Leah, their 12 sons. Why this story? There are so many things that we do in our experience, in our life, in the choices that we make. And I will just venture to say, you may disagree with me, but I know a lot of people, I know a lot of stuff that isn't, a part of their profile on Facebook. I think we make a lot of bad choices, thoroughly messed up, selfish. We don't even understand why sometimes decisions, and those decisions, they mess up our lives, and they mess up our children's lives, and they mess up the people in our lives that we care about so much. Our relationships fall apart, our connections with the people that we cared for dissolve. And so why this story? What's the gospel in this story? This story isn't over. The story continues. And so does yours. The people in the Bible, they are not in the Bible because they made good decisions. They didn't make the Bible because they did the right things. They are included in this book because they were so thoroughly messed up, but they were in connection to God. And all the way along, they make these choices, and God acts regardless. God makes promises to them. He works through them. He works in their midst. He works around them. And he does it all because he loves them. And the reason why we read this book, why we talk about it in this forum, in our community as a church, is because these stories, they tell us what God is like. And when we see what he's like, then we'll know what he might be doing for us when we can't see tomorrow. In our darkness, in our time of emptiness and fear, our time of anxiety and despair, he's there and we didn't know it. Will you pray with me? Father God, you are the Father of, you're the one that created us, and you're the one that called us. You're the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you're the God that is consistent through all these different stories, through all these different choices, and you're trustworthy. As we continue in the next number of weeks to look at the story of Joseph, continue to show us how trustworthy you are, and teach us to depend on you in every little thing, and to walk through darkness, to sit in darkness, knowing that you were there even when we didn't see it. Thank you for revealing yourself to us. We will trust you. We ask these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen. May God bless you.